70th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Brenda Brook, and I'm chair of the Book Fair Committee, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to First Friends, the powerful, unsung, and unelected people who shaped our presidents by Gary Ginsberg. This is the 70th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair, and we're celebrating with an entire year of book and story programming. Just as we honor the world's first Jewish book fair, highlighting diverse authors, curating new Jewish writing, and promoting the global art of Jewish storytelling. Our festival week, which continues through Sunday, November 14th, is just the beginning. Be sure to come back all year for exceptional opportunities to engage with the best of Jewish books and authors. To see our full schedule, watch events you may have missed, and find our online store where you can find First Friends and other hand-selected books and gifts, visit our website at culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. If you enjoy this event and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to Book Fair, and you can do either or both at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. We rely on community support to make this annual event possible, so thank you in advance for becoming part of our family. The Book Fair team would like to thank the following for their support. Our day sponsors are Elaine and Michael Serling, and our sponsors tonight are Susan Sovell and Janet and Donald Schenk. I also want to extend my deepest gratitude to the whole Book Fair committee. Their dedication, innovation, commitment, and hard work made all of this possible. We have a stimulating event for you this evening, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the new YouTube comment section or by texting to the number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they will take as many of your questions as they can. While you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our interesting events. The focus of tonight's event is First Friends, the powerful, unsung, and unelected people who shaped our presidents. We have with us the author of the book, Gary Ginsberg, as well as local writer, media producer, and teacher Harvey Ovshinsky, who will moderate the discussion. First Friends reveals the riveting histories of presidential friendships, among them Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Daisy Suckley, and John F. Kennedy and David Ormsby Gore. Former Clinton aide Gary Ginsberg breaks new literary ground on Pennsylvania Avenue and provides fresh insights into the lives of the men who have held the most powerful political offices in the world by looking at the friends on whom they relied. Gary Ginsberg is a lawyer, American political operative, and corporate advisor, serving as a strategist in both the public and private sectors for more than 25 years. Harvey Ovshinsky is a writer, story consultant, media producer, and teacher, and he's the author of the new memoir, Scratching the Surface, which we were pleased to feature at our summer book bash back in August. So please join me in welcoming Gary Ginsberg and Harvey Ovshinsky.
Thank you, Brenda, very much for that introduction. And happy anniversary, happy birthday, Jewish Book Fair, 70th anniversary. That's a big deal. Congratulations. And Gary, congratulations to you for writing First Friends.
Thank you, Harvey.
It was delightful to read. One of the things I enjoyed most about your book is that you don't have to be a president. You don't have to be a politician to appreciate the lessons learned about the value that you write about regarding these deep, personal, abiding friendships and relationships. And to be clear, we're not just talking about poker pals, are we?
No, we're not.
Who are we talking about?
No, we're talking about, listen, I think to your point, one of the reasons why I think the book has resonated is because we all have, or most of us have, a best friend or best friends. And we can all understand the importance that that friend plays in our life, either on an emotional level, providing respite, providing a sympathetic ear, or on a substantive level, kind of keeping us in our lane, speaking the hard truth, telling us what we may not want to hear, but need to hear. And it's the same for the United States president. I mean, in many ways, it's accented because of the loneliness of the job and the consequences of making a misstep or of not being emotionally balanced. And so I think when we're talking about friendship, it's really the same kind of friendship for a president that it is in your life, Harvey, and in my life, and most of I would think the viewers of this broadcast tonight is somebody who you rely on, whom you've known through good times and bad times, who you've gone through, a lot of experiences with. And the idea in this book was to find friends, not members of a family, because I think family is different than friends, nor staff, because I think being a staffer and serving at the pleasure of a president kind of changes the dynamic of a friendship than somebody whom you've known your whole life, whom you know presumably long before you became president, and have established a relationship that's one of equals. Whereas when you're a staffer, I think there's an unequal relationship where you're, as I say, serving at the pleasure of the man, and there are limits to what you can say without threatening your job.
Can we talk about your process? How did you go about identifying your 9 first friends? You had 46 to choose from, Gary. What was the criteria? What were you looking for? I mean, how did you choose which puppies to kill?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to pick friendships that spanned the history of the United States. So I wanted to find a friendship from the Civil War era. I wanted to find a friendship from the Founding Fathers era. I wanted to find a friendship that was in the era leading up to the Civil War, to the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War. And I wanted to find a president that either was in the 21st century or bridged the 21st century. So I picked 9 presidents that covered the span of our nation's history. Then, as I said just a minute ago, I wanted to find friendships that both existed before the friend became president and then existed during the presidency, because I didn't think you could see the totality of friendship if it ended before the friend became president.
And what's the criteria? How do you be a friend to the president? What do you have to? I mean, I have 2 good, close first friends. I'm sure you do. Is it the same, or what does it take to become a close first friend to the president of the most powerful in the world?
Well, I really didn't want to choose a friendship that started once the president was in office, because I didn't consider that to be the kind of abiding long friendship that I was hoping to showcase in this book. So the closest I came to that kind of a question was Colonel House in 1911, who befriended Woodrow Wilson, who was running for president, was a year away from becoming president. And they bonded over 2 meals in November of 1911, such that they became really best friends. And so I made a slight exception for that. But in every other case, the friendships really started as long as 50 years before the president took office. And I think then, to your question, it's no different than how you formed your friendships or I formed my friendships. It's in college, it's growing up, neighbor down the street, somebody in a first job, somebody in the military, somebody through your family. So there was no magic sauce to that, but
someone you connect to, someone you relate and connect to on a very deep level.
Well, that was really the idea, because I didn't think it would be a particularly fertile story if the friendship wasn't deep and abiding, where they didn't share values and interests.
Okay.
They didn't like to spend a lot of time together, where they weren't able to speak hard truths to each other, not just to the president, but the president back to the friend.
All right. This is a Jewish book fair, so we've got to talk about Harry Truman and Eddie Jacobson.
Yes.
Tell me, Dish, what was that about? Truman?
Well, I think it was the single most consequential moment when a friend spoke to his friend, the president, and changed history. They became friends in 1903. Eddie Jacobson was the son of Lithuanian immigrants to Missouri. His father was a shoemaker. Eddie stayed in school till he was 16 and then dropped out because he said education doesn't buy bread. He went to work for a haberdashery. It's a word I had never really used before I wrote the book. He was selling men's clothing. He was making the receipts at a bank in downtown Kansas City. At that bank, a teller, 23 years of age, a bespectacled young man named Harry Truman, was receiving those receipts, and they became friends. They then drifted apart for 14 years and met again in a field artillery unit in the First World War. And they became great friends because, as Truman said, I have a crackerjack of a Jew who knows how to make a lot of money. And what Eddie did, he said, I have a crackerjack of a Jew. That's how he described it.
You could get away with saying that.
You could. Yes. He said worse things about our people. But that was an observation he made when Eddie took control of the canteen in the field artillery unit and professionalized it such that it made a lot of money, and it made Harry Truman a much more effective leader of that artillery unit.
And what difference did their relationship make in Truman's presidency?
Yeah,
in our life.
So really. It made a huge difference. They had a friendship that spanned from, as I say, 1903 through Eddie's death in 1956. But the climactic moment came in 1948. They were friends at that point for 45 years. Eddie had never really asked Harry for anything. When Harry would come back from Washington, where he served as a senator, then a vice president, then president, he would always go to see Eddie. They would hunt together. They would eat dinners together. They would play poker together. And it was a melding of two men of basically homespun Middle Western values. They liked each other's company. They could speak very bluntly, very plainly to each other, and they had shared interests. It comes to this climactic moment in 1948 when Harry Truman has to make a very consequential decision, what to do about the land of Palestine. The British mandate is running out in 1948, and he has to decide whether to recognize a Jewish state alongside an Arab state. The UN, as many people know, in November of 1947 had partitioned the land. The Arabs refused to accept the partition, and it went basically, the partition plan went away. And the British are now leaving in May of 1948, and Harry Truman has to decide, am I going to push for a Jewish state, or am I going to leave it to the UN? And if it's left to the UN, there will be no Jewish state. That's the background. Eddie became a very ardent Zionist. It was one of the causes that he really developed later in life. And in March of 1948, he gets a phone call in the middle of the night from the head of the B'nai B'rith, Frank Goldman. And he says, Eddie, I know you've never done anything to use your friendship with Harry Truman, but you need to do something now. You need to convince him to see Chaim Weizmann, who's sitting in New York, waiting to come down to Washington to talk Harry Truman into recognizing a Jewish state. Harry Truman, who was a devout Baptist and read the Bible, appreciated the Jewish connection to the land. However, the problem was his Secretary of State, George Marshall, the revered general, was dead set against a Jewish state.
Yes.
He thought that recognizing a state would invite a war, that the Soviet Union would enter the sphere, that American servicemen would once again be back in war 3 years after the end of the Second World War, and it would lead to an oil boycott. And he didn't want any part of those scenarios. Not only was he opposed to it as the Secretary of State, but the Defense Department was opposed to it. So Truman, in facing re-election in 1948, has the most revered man in America dead set against the idea of recognizing a state. Chaim Weizmann, who is obviously one of the most foremost spokespeople for the Zionist cause, is sitting in New York, and everyone knows that if he gets in to see Harry Truman, he's likely to convince him. But Truman won't see him because Truman is just sick of the issue. Jews have been lobbying him quite aggressively for the prior 6 months. He said, Jesus Christ couldn't keep the Jews happy in his lifetime. How am I supposed to keep them happy? He was frustrated by that. Yeah, he was really frustrated. And by March, he just said, I'm not meeting with any more Jews. They've been frustrating me. I'm done. So Eddie gets this phone call. He writes a note to Harry saying, I want you to see Chaim Weizmann. Truman writes back right away, says, I'm not seeing him. So Eddie gets on a plane, flies halfway across the country, walks up the north driveway of the White House, walks into the appointment secretary's office and says, I want to see my best friend, Harry Truman. Matt Conley knew Eddie Jacobson because they were such good friends. He says, absolutely, Harry's in the office. Welcome to go in. But one thing, do not bring up Palestine. He does not want to talk about it. So Eddie says, of course, won't bring it up. Walks into the Oval Office. Harry's sitting at the desk. They make some chit chat. And then about 5 minutes into the chit chat, Harry looks up and he says, "Well, Eddie, what are you doing here? You didn't fly across the country to make chit chat. What brings you here?" And Eddie says, "You need to see Chaim Weitzman." And immediately Truman goes into a tirade, bangs his hand on the desk. "I'm so sick of being hectored by you guys. I'm done with the issue. I'm not going to see Chaim Weitzman. I'm not going to do anything further on this issue. I'm sorry." And at that point, and he's red-faced, and he's using expletives, and he's really, really, really angry at Eddie for bringing it up. At this point, Eddie says the first time in his life he thought Harry Truman was an anti-Semite in 45 years. But he's not going to leave that office without getting what he came for. So he's looking around the Oval Office, and he sees a small bust of Andrew Jackson. And he knows that Harry Truman's hero in life, it's hard to believe today in 2021, but his hero in life was Andrew Jackson. So he says to Truman, "Listen, Harry, I've known you all my life. I know who your hero is. It's Andrew Jackson. My hero is Chaim Weitzman. He's a sick, ailing man who came across the ocean to see you. You know what's the right thing to do. And you know what Andrew Jackson would have done in your situation. He was a man who knew what to do. He could separate right from wrong. He also wasn't afraid of being hectored, of being frustrated. He would still get over it. He would do the right thing. The right thing, Harry, is to see Chaim Weitzman and to see him immediately." Harry turns his chair around. He faces the rose garden, looking at the credenza. He bangs his hand on the desk. He mulls the issue for a good minute and a half. Finally swivels his chair back around and says, "God damn it, you bald-headed son of a bitch. I'll see him." And 3 days later, Chaim Weitzman came down from New York. He was not on the schedule. They kind of brought him in secretly. He made his impassioned plea. Truman listened to him quite carefully, quite seriously. And 11 minutes after the State of Israel was declared in May of 1948, Harry Truman was the first foreign leader to recognize the State of Israel.
That's a great story. Who knew?
Yeah.
Who knew?
I had a vague idea because Truman credited Jacobson for years. Jacobson was feted in Israel. He went over there in 49. He met with Ben Gurion. He met with Weitzman. People talked about him as becoming the first president of Israel. So he received a fair amount of acclaim during his lifetime for that moment in the Oval Office. And as I say, I think it was the most consequential moment in American history.
We have so much to talk about with Gary Ginsberg, the author of First Friends, which is a delightful, inspiring read about not just about presidents and politicians and their need for best first friends, but how what we can all learn from those relationships. Let's take some questions. I think you know how to do it. It's on your screen. I think Brenda mentioned that we are taking questions. We'll take as many as we can. Gary, I have another question. I don't know how to ask this. Why do you think it's especially important for presidents to have first friends? I mean, isn't that what first ladies are for?
Oh, sure. And listen, I think in fairness, a number of presidents' best friends have been their wives. And I didn't want to do wives for the reason I said earlier. But I think a friend also is somebody that you can confide in a way that you can't even with your wife, particularly if it involves emotional matters that you may not want to share with your wife. I think Bill Clinton is a great example of that. I think his relationship with Vernon Jordan was quite different than the president's relationship with Hillary Clinton. And so, as I said, listen, the presidency is an intensely lonely office. I saw that most pronounced with Franklin Roosevelt, who was fighting a world war. He's fighting a depression, yet he was intensely lonely because his wife was away for a good portion of his presidency. His kids weren't in the White House. And as he said to his closest friend, Daisy Suckley, "I'm either exhibit A or left entirely alone." And so Daisy Suckley provided that companionship that he so desperately needed and wanted. There was one day when he had 22 separate meetings in 1944. Now, I don't know about you, Harvey, but I would have wanted to just go to bed after 22 separate meetings. All he wanted to do was have dinner alone with Daisy. because he needed that time to unwind, to relax, to laugh, to share a relationship that didn't involve the affairs of state.
To take off the cape, the Superman cape.
Just be yourself and talk to somebody you've known. You know, you knew her. She was a sixth cousin, so it was distant enough to qualify under my definition, and had become friends with her when he was rehabilitating himself after contracting polio. So he had a long friendship with her, and they relaxed each other. They humored each other. She was a really just great antidote, as I say, to that intense loneliness that he felt throughout his presidency.
Okay. We have a question from Naomi Levine. And it's a good question. What brought you to this table? What inspired you to write this particular book? Why this book? Why now?
Yeah.
For both you and readers like us. Where's the fire?
Well, to be quite honest, I woke up with the idea in April of 2018. Just said, oh my God, I got to write this book. It just kind of came to me in my sleep. But I think the reason is that I had been in and around enough situations to witness the role of a first friend, to have come to appreciate it. I was a student of the presidency since I was 9 years old.
You were one of those in high school, weren't you?
I actually watched a play in my elementary school, my third grade class. We saw the sixth grade put on a play about Abraham Lincoln's assassination, and I was transfixed by the presidency from that moment on.
Wow.
Now, why the sixth grade faculty would think that's the right entry point for third graders, I still can't quite figure out, but I was hooked. And I worked on the 1984 Gary Hart presidential campaign.
You did?
I did. And I watched the first friendship between Warren Beatty, the Hollywood actor, and Gary Hart.
Yeah.
And I watched how Hart would speak to Hart, how Beatty would speak to Hart in a way that no staffer would dare speak to him, because he knew a lot about stagecraft. And he would watch Hart prepare for his speeches, and he would say, Gary, stop talking and acting like a politician. Act like a human being. Relax, smile. And everybody else would tiptoe around the candidate. He, who he'd known him really well for 12 years, could just speak to him in that blunt way that really got Hart's attention. But at the same time, afterwards, they go out for these late night dinners. And I could see across the room, I wasn't sitting at the table, I was 21 years old, but I could see, Hart would just relax and laugh. Yeah. And he got that respite that he so desperately needed. And so I said, wow, what an interesting role. And no one talked about Warren Beatty in terms of who was around Hart during that 84 crazy campaign. I saw that same dynamic again in 1992 with Vernon Jordan. Okay. And the same interplay with his best friend, Bill Clinton, the governor of Arkansas. And I write in my preface at the same time that I was vetting vice presidential candidates. And the man who I was vetting Al Gore with, a man named Harry McPherson, became fixated on the idea that Al Gore did not have a first friend. And he had worked for Lyndon Johnson and had seen in his mind how that had hurt Lyndon Johnson as president. And he didn't have anybody to confide in, to relax with during that really tough days of fighting the Vietnam War. And so when I went to talk to him about our interview with Al Gore that was coming up, he said, I want to ask him one question. Does he have a first friend? Does he have any friends? Because it's not clear to me that he does. And if he doesn't, I would be concerned about him sitting in the Oval Office.
Wow.
So that was really kind of the eureka moment for me of how important this was.
When I read that in your book, First Friends, Gary, I was reminded by one of my favorite quotes by Oscar Wilde, when he asked us, how can you tell the difference between an enemy and a friend? Yeah. An enemy, no, a friend will stab you in the front. You can steal that. You can steal that when you get tired. Go ahead.
No, I should have written my book.
Well,
wish I'd known you earlier.
We didn't know each other.
I wish I'd known you.
Well, would you be my friend? No, we're covered. But anyway, that's what Wilde said. A friend will stab you in the front. He or she, well, because all your 9 presidents were all men, and for the most part, their best friends were
someday.
Yeah. That they'll tell you what other people, especially if you're the president, you're the president, what they don't want to hear. And I also thought in reading First Friends, I kept coming back to Trump.
Yeah.
One of the reasons he was such a colossal failure so many of them, I can't even begin to tell you, was his inability to have the kind of first friends that would speak truth to his power. I mean, if this
Exactly.
weren't, I'd like to be obscene about what he needed from his friends to do to him to make him feel good.
Yeah.
For the pleasure and release of his company. But he just didn't have that kind of friendship, and you need it. We need it. Go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to add that one of the other influences in 2018 was exactly that, Harvey, was the recognition that Donald Trump did not have that first friend to speak truth to him. And I think we all saw just how damaging that absence was, particularly in the final 2 months of his presidency.
Sure.
When no one could walk into that Oval Office. I mean, certainly it wasn't Rudy Giuliani who was aiding and abetting him. I did some research on this question because I didn't want to just impute my own sense of Trump and his lack of friends. So I spoke to a few people very close to him, and it confirmed just what you and I are saying, which is Trump did not need or want a first friend at any point in his life. He wasn't constitutionally capable of having a first friend.
Or anybody else.
Well, because think about it, to have a first friend, and everybody who's listening to this can, I think, appreciate that, you have to give something of yourself.
Yeah.
You have to show empathy. You have to show interest in your friend.
Yeah.
Passion.
You have to give you have to care.
Exactly. And he did.
Jamie.
Can I say one last thing on this?
Absolutely.
He'd go up to Camp David on weekends. He'd bring friends and family. And what he would do is he would sit in the cabin and just call around to supporters around the country and ask, how am I doing? And that was his form of relaxation and company, was just that kind of amorphous mass of people who affirmed his sense of being. And so I kind of shorthand his first friend as his Twitter feed during his presidency. That's what gave him the sustenance, the company, the sense of, of being that other presidents needed a friend for.
One of my friends at Mumford High School, Benson Barr, has written a question wasn't it necessary for friends first and others to need security clearance? And what if you didn't have any? Does that disqualify you from being a bestie?
It's a really good question,
Benson. Yeah,
it's a really good question. I'll just give you one answer that illuminates how crazy this whole concept is. So I mentioned Woodrow Wilson's first friend was Colonel House. Colonel House became the most powerful man in the United States government, save for the president. He ran U.S. foreign policy from 1913 to 1919. At one and the same time, he was our Secretary of State, our National Security Advisor, our presidential personnel head, our head of the CIA, our head of the NSC. And yet he was never confirmed by the Senate. He had no security clearance. He had no oversight. He never had a title.
Wow.
And yet he ran vast swaths of the U.S. government. That would never happen today. You cannot put a friend in a role of such substance without there being some kind of accountability.
Of all 9 of the first friends you profiled in first book, I want to hold it up. I love the cover, by the way. I'm a real fan of covers. They really sometimes you can judge a book.
I spent a lot of time on that cover. Shocking.
I know. Listen, I know the feeling.
Yeah,
I know the feeling.
Good deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, and what I love about it is because I thought I knew what I wrote in my memoir, Scratching the Surface, but Brad Knorr, the designer, took the book and saw something that I couldn't imagine. I never saw coming, and changed everything. Really, what the heck? Only. I'm not doing this to sell a book, but you get the feeling. Scratching the surface.
That looks great. I love
Look what he did. Look what he did.
Genius.
I just love it. Anyway, covers. I love the cover, and I love what's inside. Of all the 9, any favorites? Anyone who you particularly identify, or who spoke to you for whatever reason?
That's interesting. It's funny. No one's really quite put it that way. Well, the one that I had the most fun writing was Clinton and Jordan, because I lived that relationship for so many years, and I was able to interview the president. I was actually able to ask Clinton, "Who is your first friend?" He had so many friends.
Yes, he did.
Time to think about it. called me back a few weeks later and said, I want to do Vernon Jordan, which was great because I'd already interviewed Vernon. So I was able to play the role of both historian and journalist in that chapter, and I really enjoyed it. The one where I probably related the most in terms of the friend, and the one I was most surprised about and most delighted by, was probably John Kennedy's friendship with David Ormsby Gore. Because and in that one, I should just add, I had a lot of people to choose from for Kennedy's first friend. He had enormous circles, wide circles of friend groups that I write about in my chapter. And so I actually asked his daughter, Caroline, who's a good friend of mine from law school, and I worked with her brother at George Magazine. And I said, tell me, who do you think is your dad's best friend? And she said, I'm going to give you a name that you've never heard of, but I'm certain from, my knowing him, as well as my mother's relationship with him and my own relationship with him, because he lived till 1985. He was the British ambassador of the United States. His name is David Ormsby Gore. It's going to take you about 48 hours to figure out why he was so close to my father, but when you do, you're going to love it. And she was dead right. It took me about 72 hours to figure out why they were such good friends, because there's really been very little written about it. He only gave one oral interview to the Kennedy Library of 77 pages. By contrast, Lem Billings, his friend from Choate, gave 14 hours of interview. But I think that David Ormsby Gore was the perfect example of a friend who delighted Kennedy, relaxed him, humored him, but also played a hugely important role in advising him and steering him, particularly during his presidency, on crucial foreign policy issues. Whether it was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which he played a very pivotal role in, which I write about at length, and then in convincing Kennedy to pursue and sign the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963,
Wow.
which I think played a huge role in accelerating the end of the Cold War. And it's just a wonderful friendship. I mean, they were cut from the same cloth. They were both second sons of powerful fathers who loved to talk fast and gossip and play golf and go to the horse races and carouse. They loved to argue about foreign policy and talk about the nature of leadership in democracies. And then it all plays out from their childhood when they meet in 1938 as 19-year-olds, and Kennedy was 20, until 1963 when Kennedy is shot. And then it takes this crazy turn at the end. I don't know if you remember, Harvey, but he falls in love with Jackie Kennedy. His wife had died early in 1967, and by the end of 1967, he proposes to Jackie Kennedy, proposes marriage. And she writes a really touching note at the end and says to David, we share too much pain. And if we're ever going to feel joy again in our lives, we have to do it apart from each other.
Wow.
And so she went and married Aristotle Onassis. He married a Vogue fashion editor, and they went on with their own lives. But it was I'm not
sure she was right. I think she would have been better off with him, and it sounds like he might have been better off with her. But what do I know?
I think you're right, and it's interesting. I didn't put it in my book, and I probably should have. But I spoke to Gore's daughter, Jane Ormsby Gore. She's the Lady Jane of the Rolling Stones song, because she had a close relationship with Mick Jagger. And she told me that at her dad's funeral in 1985, Jackie Kennedy went to their Wales house, which was on a cliff overlooking, I guess, the North Sea.
Their Wales house, yes.
Their Wales house, yes, because he was a lord. He was Lord Harlech by then. And she got to the reception after the funeral. She was really bereaved because she was so close to Gore, even after she spurned his marriage proposal. And she noticed walking up the beach how secluded and safe his house was in Wales. And she walks into the house and she finds Jane Gore and she says, I never knew how safe a house this was.
Wow.
And Jane Ormsby Gore said to me, I think if she had known that, she may have wanted to take his marriage proposal because she was so afraid at that point of her own security that I think she thought that Onassis with his billions could give her that kind of physical security.
Well, she was traumatized. I mean, we forgive her. I mean, we have 25 more minutes to talk with Gary Ginsberg, the author of first friends. And you don't have to be a president or a politician to have one. I've got 2 first friends. Gary, how many do you have?
2 or 3,
Yeah.
depending on the day.
Including my wife makes 3. So
Yeah, no, don't include the wife.
so we got 25 more minutes to take your questions. I've got some. Gary may have some things he wants to talk about. Your research, was it difficult to research those earlier presidents of this century, that century? And was it fascinating? Was it slow going? I have a love-hate relationship with research.
That's
You have to
interesting.
kiss a lot of,
Yeah.
frogs.
Yes, indeed. I found it fascinating only because I got to spend so much time with heroes from my past. So, all the presidents interested me. And then when I found through research the touch points with the friends I chose, it just kind of came to life. And it was fun for me because there was no real, I had nothing to go on in order to tell this story because there was no book like it. And so I kind of played around with different ways to bring the reader into the story. I didn't want to just do a linear story of the president's biography, a linear story of the friend's biography, and then join them together. I tried mixing and matching, finding moments to draw the reader in. So that was a lot of fun for me as a new author to kind of play around with finding my voice, finding my structure. In terms of the research, it was mainly done during the pandemic. And thank God for the internet, because the libraries were closed. And what I found was there's just so much information to be mined, even about something as old as a Revolutionary War friendship. I mean, the letters that Jefferson and Madison exchanged between them, 1,250 letters. And you can spend days, months reading these letters.
Yeah.
You get a sense of their friendship.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, we share many things, among them first authors.
Yeah.
I've done many things. I never do anything twice. I always do first things. So this is my first book.
What made you want to write your book? What
I'm sorry?
What motivated you to write your book?
Oh, because I was a documentary producer for a long time, and I made a very good living telling other people's stories, spinning my yarns with their threads.
Yeah.
And the closer I got to my 70th birthday, I said, this can't go on. I mean, I teach my students, don't stop, go further. Write them in DS, GF, Gary. Don't stop, go further. Write them in. So I had to take some of my own vitamins and find out where was my voice in my stories. And so I decided to do it, and Wayne State University Press helped me do it, which brings me, by the way, to my next question for you. What was the best note? You tell me yours, I'll tell you mine. What was the best note your editor or developmental editor or whoever kicked your ass gave you?
Yeah.
And became your first friend to this journey of writing this book?
I think it was very simple. It was show, don't tell. And that guided me throughout my writing of this book, because I learned that what drives really good writing is story.
Yes.
Is not asserting, but showing it.
Actions speak louder than words.
Yes, exactly.
And you're a lawyer, so you don't have a lot of experience showing. I mean, you're good at what you did because you told great stories, but it's not the same.
It's not the same. And it takes a while to really, for that to sink in. And so those early chapters, I would get purple.
Yeah.
Show, don't tell.
It took me 4 years to write Scratching the Surface, 2 years to write a bad book, and 2 more to write a good one.
It's interesting.
And no, seriously, my developmental editor, along with my peer reviewers, academic presses require this, they rejected the first draft, my third first draft. That was humiliating. But they said, oh, look, Ovshinsky's a storyteller, right? He's a filmmaker. Shouldn't his life story be more cinematic? Why does it have to be so linear? Why does it have to be so chronological? Hello?
Yeah. Right.
I needed that best friendly advice. They were right. You got some good advice too.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to business. Going back, has the dynamic or the need for first friendships changed since I know you didn't write about George Washington and beyond.
I could have. He
But
had a great friend, yeah.
has it changed much over the centuries, or is the secret sauce still the same?
Well, let me use the example of Joe Biden's first friend, because I spent, I would hope to add one more chapter if I could for the paperback, and I was hoping to do Biden's first friendship. So I asked around, and I asked 20, 25 people, and everybody said it's Ted Kaufman, who was his chief of staff for 22 years and his best friend for 50 years. Because they not only worked together, but they took the train back and forth to Wilmington because Ted lived there as well. They forged an incredible friendship. And just to answer your question, so I call up Ted all the time. And I asked him, I said, do you talk to your best friend Joe about issues? Does he call you up and say, what should I do about Afghanistan, for example? How do I withdraw in an orderly fashion? He said, Gary, the issues have become so complex. The bureaucracies are so large today. When the decision gets to a president's desk, that means that 5,000 other people couldn't make that decision. If I'm not in Washington, if I'm not in and around the deliberations and know that issue cold, who am I to give advice? I don't think, friends, in the olden days, when there was a far less complex executive branch, where the issues weren't as complex as they are today, I don't think the friends were so reticent.
Okay.
And also, I think the glare of the media is so much greater today that you can't hide your friendships.
Yeah.
And I think presidents would be loath to give somebody, a friend, the kind of brief, for example, that I talked about with Colonel House. That would never happen again. I think the closest thing that came to that was Bobby Kennedy and the assumption of additional powers that he played in his brother's presidency, beyond being Attorney General.
I've got some great. First of all, Benson Barr, my fellow Mumford Mustang, first friend. Thank you, Benson, for the remark about my book. Susan Lutz wrote to us, wanting to know. This is a very good question. Considering the state, we'll call it the state of U.S. democracy. How it's never been in more jeopardy than it is now. Can you recall, based on your research or what you know or what you've written, is there ever been a time like this that presidents had to confront this kind of threat to the very foundation of this democratic republic? Great question, Susan. Thank you.
Great question. I think the closest example would have been my chapter on Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
It wasn't a question of are we going to be a democracy or not. It was going to be whether we are going to be the United States of America, obviously. And when Lincoln takes office in March of 1861, he's already lost 7 southern states.
Wow.
And the reason why I bring this up is because his first friend, Joshua Speed, a man he slept in a double bed with for 4 years in the late 1800s.
I was curious about that relationship.
Yeah,
it's bigger fish to fry.
It's occasioned an enormous amount of debate among people as to whether they were lovers or just best friends, platonic best friends. And I say in the book, I don't believe they were lovers. In the late 1830s, lawyers like Abraham Lincoln would hop into bed with anybody because there were not a lot of Holiday Inns.
Yeah, and they had to keep warm.
And they need to keep warm, exactly. But the reason why I bring this up is that Lincoln faced the possibility of 4 additional states seceding right away when he took office. They were the border states. And Joshua Speed, his best friend, was from Kentucky, which was the most important of the 4 border states. And if he lost Kentucky, he was probably going to lose the other 3. Now you have 11 states arrayed against the Union. And so in the case of Joshua Speed, he plays an incredibly important role in making sure that Kentucky did not secede. And this all came about because of a friendship that they had forged when they were 20 years younger. And it was because of the durability of that friendship that Lincoln could rely on him, even though he was a Democrat, even though he was a slave owner, to play this pivotal role, his point man on the ground in Kentucky, to make sure that that state didn't secede. But I think Abraham Lincoln faced existential threats to our country's structure, to its future in those 4 years as president.
Can we talk about the elephant in the room? With so many stories about such an intense, deeply personal, almost intimate, I would say, in a non-physical, non-sexual way, relationships between these first friends, the president and his first friend, brings me to ask the question, how did this such a deep, abiding relationship, friendship, go over with the first ladies?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, what am I, chopped liver, they say?
Yeah, no. I mean,
what are you?
You're exactly right. So it varied from president to president, but it was a constant theme. Pat Nixon, I think, really resented. I think she tolerated the friendship of Bibi Rebozo, but I think she knew that her husband and Bibi were probably far closer than she was with her husband, certainly during his presidency. Eleanor Roosevelt, I think, was suspicious early in Daisy Suckley's relationship with Franklin Roosevelt, the woman I spoke about earlier, the antidote to his loneliness. I think they had a brief sexual relationship in 1935 in his third year as president. And I think Eleanor was always a little wary of her around the White House. The most interesting example of that question was Woodrow Wilson's second wife, Edith Wilson. She comes on the scene in 1915. Wilson's wife, Ellen, had died in 1914. And became really Woodrow Wilson's absolute consoler-in-chief, was with him every step of the way. They spent an inordinate amount of time together. Now the new wife comes on the scene, and she resents her new husband's reliance on his best friend and does everything she can to try to undermine that friendship from the get-go. It takes her 4 years, as I write in my book, but in 1919, the day the Versailles Treaty is signed, she finally exacts her ultimate revenge and excises Colonel House from her husband's life. And Colonel House then spends the next 20 years, remaining 20 years of his life, trying to make sense of this incredible friendship that went completely awry. So
there's jealousy, there's anger, there's other deep, dark reactions to these kind of first friends by the first ladies. It occurred to me there might be a sense of relief for some of them. Well,
what do you
talk
mean?
to your friend. Relief.
Yeah, 100%.
Share. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I think, first of all, I think Jackie Kennedy loved David Ormsby Gore.
Okay.
She said throughout her life that there was nobody that Jack learned more from or she learned more from. She loved the melding of the minds. She would sit and take notes while they would have conversations because they were so substantive. And she wanted, I mean, it's interesting. I learned that no other couple during the Kennedy presidency spent more time with the Kennedys and the kids and the president and the first lady than David and Sissy Gore. So he was not only such a great friend to Jack, but he was a great friend, and his wife was a great friend to the couple and gave them so much joy during their presidency. But you're right. I mean, it can go either way. But I think to your point, more often than not, it was just, I think the first ladies loved the fact, and I know Hillary did because I asked her, she said Bill needed respite because of the intensity of the job, and Vernon gave him respite. There was no one better for Bill when he needed to just let off steam than to call Vernon for a game of golf or to go out for a meal or to have him come over to the White House. And she saw the immense importance of that she couldn't provide.
Yeah. Oh, Susan Sherry Ginsberg. No relation?
My cousin.
Really? Are you serious? Hey, cuz. Your cousin wants to know how did these relationships fare after the presidency was over? What happened to their relationship? Did it survive, or was there ever any part where some of the attraction, unconsciously or no, was that kind of access to the most powerful person in the world? Great, Sherry. Thank you.
That's a great question. I have not been asked that question in 4 months.
You're in Detroit now, Gary. You're in Detroit.
Yeah, good question. So I'll answer it through example. So Madison and Jefferson were best friends for 50 years, from 1776 till Jefferson dies on July 4th, 1826. After they each left office, they spent the remaining years of their life working together. Back in Virginia, they both worked together to create the University of Virginia, which was the first state university in what is now, a pretty robust university system that so many millions of Americans every year enjoy. Hawthorne and Pierce, after Pierce's presidency, he relied on Hawthorne because he was one of his only friends after his failed presidency, when his own community turned on him. And it was two friends against the world, essentially. And it was that friendship that allowed each of them to kind of exist, because each was so rejected by the world because of their friendship with each other, because they were Northerners who supported slavery. There's, I think in every example, frankly, the friendship survived well past the president left office because of the durability and the depth of the friendship.
We've got a few more minutes to close before we leave each other. We've had 46 presidents in this country. You've chosen
45 men, 46 presidencies. You know why?
Oh yes.
Grover Cleveland.
I knew that. What?
I can tell.
Yeah, no, I didn't. At Mumford, history was not my subject. But I guess my question was, there were a lot of puppies to kill. You had to make a lot of choices about presidents not to include. Did anyone talk about the ones that got away? You would have liked to, if you had written a bigger book.
Yeah,
you would have liked to have included.
Well, I would have liked to. So I would have loved to have included some of our most recent presidents. Obviously, I said with Trump that I did try to find a first friend. My publisher did not want me to include a Trump chapter because he thought it would be a real turnoff for the majority of readers. But he didn't have a friend, so there was. I could have written a chapter called Trump and Trump, but it would have somewhat defeated, Trump's friend with Trump, the narcissism. But I thought that would. But I did talk to George W. Bush's staff. They talked to Bush himself. Bush really loved the idea of the book, wanted to do an interview with me. He said he wanted to do his brother Marvin, which I would have deviated from my rule. He wanted to talk about his friendship with Don Evans, who was his commerce secretary and best friend from Midland. And he wanted to talk about his dad's friendship with Jim Baker. And I would have loved to have done that if I had had time, but I simply ran out of time. I also talked to Obama's first friend, a guy named Marty Nesbitt. He was really excited to do it. He said, I've been waiting 5 years to talk about my friendship with Barack. He's going to love it. He'll want to do it. Barack did not want to do it. He was writing his own book.
Sure.
And he just didn't want to take the time. I would have been really interested in writing about the friendship between Teddy Roosevelt and Howard Taft. Thought that was fascinating because they turn on each other when Roosevelt challenges them in 1912. They were best friends for about 20 years before that election of 1912. I also would have liked to write about Ulysses S. Grant's friendship with John Rawlins, who was basically the guy who discovered Grant again in 1860 and basically promoted him as a brigadier general or major general, and got him off the bottle and back onto a career in the military, and then kept him off the bottle. That was really his biggest job because Grant was a drunk. And he plays this huge role in Grant's life, both on a substantive level as well as on an emotional level. And I thought that would have been a lot of fun. I just ran out of room because my publisher publishes one book a month, and my slot was July of 2021. So I had to have it done by a set date.
I know the feeling. We've just about run out of time. Gary, this was just a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Harvey. I really enjoyed talking to you too.
It was great. The book is called First Friends. I love the subtitle, The Powerful, Unsung, and Unelected People Who Shaped Our Presidents. And by the way, if you had more room in the cover, and changed history on occasion.
I said, I had that actually. People.
No kidding.
Yes. Who shaped our presidents and our world, and our nation. It was going to
Yeah. Well,
you got to get for this.
Yeah, well, to the 250 people, or how many people are watching now, and the over and over and over again, we now have a new subtitle. But anyway, thank you very much for telling us your story, and thanks for the JCC and the book fair. And this has been a delight.
Yeah, I want to thank the Detroit Jewish Book Fair as well, and to the JCC, and thank you, Brenda, for having me.
Oh, you have such good taste, Brenda. You and your team, really.
Thank you so much, Gary and Harvey, for being with us tonight and for such a fascinating and informative discussion. And thanks to all of you at home for joining us. Our next event is Eternal by Lisa Scotolini, tomorrow, Wednesday, November 10th at 1:30. And remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair, for our full schedule, ways to get involved, and to purchase Gary and Harvey's books. See you next time. Thanks.